has the solar system really been in its current configuration for millions and billions of years? Is it true that the Earth has orbited the Sun for billions of years unchanged? Have all of the other planets also maintained their current orbits without any deviation for time immemorial? In mainstream astronomy, we are not allowed to ask this question. This question is entirely off limits. Because if you ask this question and you get an answer that is different from what the current status quo is, what does that do? Well, it destroys the current status quo. It forces a shift in the paradigm. And maybe you guys have noticed, but right now the mainstream has zero intentions on shifting any paradigms whatsoever. And it does not matter if it's a scientific paradigm or a historical paradigm. It's irrelevant. In the modern day that we live in now, all the questions have been answered and you are not allowed to challenge them. Now, I don't care what a mainstream historian or a mainstream scientist thinks. And the reason why I no longer care is because they are incapable of providing a real scientific answer to the question that I just asked. How do we know that all of the planets have been orbiting the Sun the way they are now for millions and billions of years? How do we know? Now, there are only a couple of answers that an astronomer will give you. Maybe 3 if we want to have fun. The first answer is when you ask an astronomer this question, they will simply say something to the tune of, well, I mean, if you run this physics simulation backwards, you can see that all the planets just stay in their general orbit and nothing changes. They will literally cite a simulation on a computer to prove their millions and billions of years theory. Now, let me ask you this. If I turn on a video game, and in that video game, a human character is able to, I don't know, pick up a car or something, or fly in the sky at will, does that mean that humans everywhere can now pick up cars and fly around the sky whenever they want? And of course, the answer is no! No, of course humans cannot pick up cars and start flying around the house, throwing cars at people inside of the house. That's not happening. And the reason why it doesn't happen, and we can say that it does not happen, is because right now I can walk outside and I can see that nobody can do that. Real scientific observational evidence proves that what humans are capable of is not the same thing as in that video game. The simulation that astronomers use to prove from their perspective that planets have remained in their current orbits for billions of years falls under the exact same category. There is no difference between the physics simulation in a video game and the physics simulation in whatever astronomical garbage they have going on over there. There's no difference. They are just inputting the information that they want to see, and then they are getting their results that they expect. That is what the simulation is doing. The simulation is only simulating what they already expected the simulation to simulate. This is what most people do not know about all of these quote-unquote scientific simulations that the mainstream uses to prove whatever asinine theory they are trying to prove. So in the case of orbital mechanics, the simulators can only put in what they know. If they do not know everything, then they cannot plug in every single variable. And if they are not aware of every single variable, then there is no way that the simulation will ever be able to accurately simulate what they are truly trying to figure out. The simulation will only simulate what they want it to simulate. And that's it. They are only going to get out of it what they put into it. And of course, what they put into it is what they expect to see. They're not adding deviations. They are not adding all sorts of extra forces. They are sticking with a gravity-based universe, and they are using Newtonian mechanics, and they are simulating a solar system that comes out exactly as they expect it to come out. And then they go and they write a paper and they say, look, we simulated it using Newtonian mechanics and we used all this physics and it did exactly what we expected. Wow, what a surprise. And then, of course, it gets worse because their buddies will now cite whatever paper they write with respect to the outcome of that simulation. And now those papers will start to look good and then gain acceptance based on a simulation which inherently is incorrect. A computer simulation will only output whatever data it has inputted in the first place. It will not account for variables that it does not know to account for. It is not going to spit out all kinds of crazy answers out of nowhere. It is not going to give you necessarily the unexpected. It is not going to do that for you. A simulation only works with what it has. And if that simulation only has Newtonian orbital mechanics, a simulation only works with what it has. And if it only has Newtonian orbital mechanics programmed into it, that's what it's going to spit out. So when an astronomer runs these simulations backwards to see where the planets were at, all they see is the planets going backwards in their rotations ad nauseum for billions of years. They take this simulation as a factual representation of our past. And then, of course, everybody starts to cite this, and then it snowballs from there, and then we run into the situation we find ourselves in now. The simulation concept is bad. I'm not against simulations. There's nothing wrong with trying that. But when you use the results of your simulation and claim that those results are a scientific fact, and that is your only evidence for that supposed factual claim, that is not science. We are no longer doing anything in the realm of science. That is simply guesswork. Right now, one of the pillars of astronomy, orbital mechanics in the way that mainstream astronomers understand orbital mechanics, is based on flawed ideas, and ultimately it's just wrong. It's scientifically wrong, and we now know that they are wrong. Of course, mainstream astronomers won't acknowledge the evidence that proves them wrong. So the simulation is bad. Now, there's one other problem with the simulation that really should have made every single astronomer immediately discard any result from the simulations anyway. And that problem is the three-body problem. In physics, we can calculate two bodies and predict their motion, no problem. We can rewind that motion as well and we'll get an accurate answer. However, if you introduce a third body into your little simulation, it becomes essentially impossible to predict where those physical bodies will end up in relation to one another given their angular momentum. We can't do it. We do not have that kind of predictive power. There is nothing we can do about this. So when we look at a simulation that is dealing with something like the solar system, right? 9 planets, a sun, etc. Right? That's more than 3 bodies. That's more than 3 bodies. So what that means is that any simulation that was ever run on the current solar system is intrinsically wrong anyways, just because of the 3-body problem. And this is a scientific fact. There is no way around this. Okay, there's no way of arguing with me. Nobody can come out and fight me on this. This is a simple physics issue. It's just life. So it's mind-blowing to see mainstream astronomers running around saying, oh yes, we can definitely claim that all the planets have been in their current orbits for over 1 billion years or 10 billion years or whatever date they are giving nowadays. It's constantly changing. Not that that's bad. It should change on evidence. But anyways, it's constantly changing. So these guys, they have no idea what they're talking about. Whenever you see an astronomer making the claim that the current solar system has remained in its current configuration for billions of years, that astronomer is making an unscientific claim. They are wrong. There is no way around that. So when we start to ask the question, they are wrong. And there is no way around this. They make that claim based on nothing but shaky foundations. So when we ask the question to an astronomer and they throw us into this simulation hellhole, we can simply walk away. And we can walk away based on science because they don't know. The simulation does not give us any evidence at all. It gives us no evidence whatsoever that proves that our solar system has been in its current configuration for 4+ billion years. No such thing. They do not have the evidence to make that claim. So that gets rid of the simulation. Anybody who wants to try to say that we can prove it using a simulation is wrong. They're just wrong. That's all there is to it. All right, so, okay. So now, other astronomers, they might not use the simulation because they're a little smarter, and they realize all the problems that I just talked about. They are well aware of the three-body problem. They are well aware of the restrictions that human simulations have. So what do those guys say? When you ask them, what do they say? Nothing. They say nothing. These astronomers have no answer. They do not answer you. And they cannot answer you because at the end of the day, they have zero, nada, zilch, zero scientific evidence to corroborate the claim that our solar system has been in its current configuration for 4 billion years. They have nothing. There is no evidence. There is zero evidence. How do you like that? Isn't that freeing? Zero evidence. There is no reason whatsoever to believe in a modern mainstream astronomer. Nothing. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? All of these television shows, all of these books that are fed to the public, all of this propagandized material, and at the end of the day, not a single one of these pieces of media ever admit to not actually having any scientific evidence to prove the claim of 4+ billion years worth of a configured solar system. Yeah, this is a problem. We have a serious issue in science. It's mind-boggling. All of this stuff based on garbage, and people believe it. People believe it because they have been trained to believe it. I won't get into that. I won't go crazy with that right now. But that's where we are at. So when we look at the question, has our solar system been in its current configuration for 4+ billion years? The answer is simple. We don't know. Okay, that's the real answer. That is the hard, real scientific answer. I don't know. Okay, but that's the answer that the mainstream is not going to give us. And it's the one they should have given us. They could have said something like, we don't know, but here's a simulation that might give us an answer. I don't know, it's possible, we're still working on it. Wouldn't that have been a better response other than, look at this nice simulation. It proves that the solar system is that old. So if it's that old, that means, evolution has to be true. That means that all of this geology has to be true, blah, blah, blah. All of these concepts are now true based on a garbage simulation. It is all connected. The theory of uniformity is driving this chaos. Now, why am I even talking about this? What's going on here? Well, here's the problem. When we look back at history, our ancestors do not seem to agree with modern astronomers' interpretations of cosmology. Our ancestors have a completely different interpretation of what was going on in the sky, and mainstream historians are aware of this. But here's the problem. Mainstream historians believe that the solar system has been running just as it is today for 4+ billion years. So when they get a hold of astronomical documents from our ancestors, they get a hold of this data that says something like Venus was in the sky today and it was approaching Earth and we all had to run for our lives and it sucked. When they read something like that, they discard it. They don't pay attention to it. They don't take it seriously. They take a piece of somebody's history and they throw it in the trash for no other reason other than some simulation told them to do that. That's it. That's it. That is one of the main reasons why we have no connection to our past. Mainstream historians who are supposed to be the experts, right? Everybody trusts the experts. They know what's right for us. They're really smart. These people have taken this information and they have thrown it away because other people have told them to do it. That's it. None of these historians went out of their way to ask the basic question. For example, why the hell are all of our ancestors afraid of Venus possibly hitting the Earth? But what the hell is going on? Why is Venus a destroyer? Why is Mars the god of war? Why is Jupiter a thunder god and considered some kind of crazy king? Why is Saturn considered the creator and then he dies? And then he comes back from the underworld and then what the hell is going on? Between the way these stories are told and these stupid simulations, historians very readily will discard these historical documents as being nothing but fleets of imagination. And they do that. And so because they do that, we have lost a huge chunk of reality. We have lost all kinds of major answers to questions that we are still asking today. It's hilarious. Once you get rid of the mainstream garbage, suddenly science and history come to life again. We actually have a problem in modern society today to where many people are disillusioned by these two areas of study. And the reason why they are disillusioned is because there is already a ready-made answer for essentially all the major problems. With respect to astronomy, for example, the general public honestly believes that we have all of this stuff figured out. We just need to make the spaceships to get out there and then we can start making Star Wars real. I mean, that is quite literally the general public's idea of where we are with our understanding of astronomy. Nothing could be further from the truth. When we look at astronomy's modern state of existence right now, it's pathetic. I mean, it's bad. We don't know anything. And in fact, it's even funnier because when you start to look at all of the theories that have been proposed by astronomers, and then when NASA goes out there and they send probes out there, and those probes send back data that completely obliterates whatever garbage theories these guys had, they do not alter their theories as a general rule. Isn't that crazy? So, for example, right now, the dirty snowball comet theory is still reigning supreme in the communities. Everybody still believes that comets are dirty snowballs, even though we have landed on comets and we found none of that. We found hard, rocky bodies. That's what we found. We found literal hard rock bodies. No snow, no dust. Nothing like that. It was not a dirty snowball. We have found evidence that proves that theory wrong, but has the theory been changed in accordance with the data? No, they don't even change their theories relative to their own discoveries. That is where we are at in astronomy right now. That is how bad astronomy is right now. And because astronomy is in this horrible state, it is destroying our potential understanding of history. Why do I say that? Well, like I said earlier, all of our ancestors have a completely different idea of what was going on in the cosmos during their time of their lives. During the time of their lives. While some of these people were alive, they were not talking about a peaceful time in the sky. They were not talking about little points of light being the planets. Our ancestors talk about the planets literally orbiting next to Earth. Our ancestors literally talk about Earth being a planet. That's another thing that's hilarious, by the way. You know, this flat Earth psyop is some of the worst poison ever. It's funny. Nobody thought the Earth was flat back in the day. No one. Nobody in the back, no culture back in the day was like, oh yeah, we're on a flat plane and whatever. Nobody was thinking that. Everybody knew that not only was the Earth round, the Earth was a planet. They knew the Earth was a planet. There was no question about that. There's nothing. Everybody knew this, and probably one of the reasons why they knew this is because they could see other planetary bodies coming quite close to Earth multiple times. So it didn't take much for them to put two and two together, because our ancestors were not monkeys. They were not stupid. Our ancestors were smart. You could argue that today we're the idiots. Easily. You could easily argue that today. No problem. Our ancestors absolutely knew what they were doing. There's no question. When we look back at their accomplishments that still survive today, these people were no joke. So when they start recording astronomical sightings of Venus in a cometary form, we should probably pay attention to that. We should probably stop and listen. And there's a few reasons why we should do it. The first reason why is because our ancestors took the time to record that and to try to get that down to us throughout history. It's probably important if they tried to do that. If that's something they put effort into, it's probably important. We probably should not ignore it. Mainstream historians absolutely ignore it. We cannot afford to ignore this stuff. When our ancestors talk about Mars being the god of war, tormenting Earth during a very recent period in history, literally changing Earth's orbit for the last time, we should probably pay attention, because they knew what they were talking about. To make it even funnier, it's not just one or two cultures that are doing this. When I say our ancestors, I mean all humans on this planet. It does not matter which culture you come from. I guarantee I can trace you back to a source culture that had these stories. We've all got them. They are all there. And the question is why? And this question cannot be asked by historians, because historians believe in modern astronomy. And modern astronomy is driven by the theory of uniformity. And the theory of uniformity demands billions of years for everything to take place. Everything has to take 10 billion years for some weird magical reason. There's no way that any kind of a change that is, mega huge ultra can happen overnight. It's impossible. This is what astronomers believe. Ironically, astronomers also believe in black holes. Astronomers literally believe that there are these random, weird black hole abstractions just gobbling up light and matter en masse. I mean, just huge amounts of mass. But on Earth, over here in our solar system, nothing can happen. It's impossible. 4 billion years and everything has remained essentially peaceful. That's it. These people hold conflicting opinions. Or I should say they hold conflicting answers for themselves. It's stupid. It's legitimately insane. We now know, for example, that gravity is one of the weakest forces in existence. However, astronomers take the weakest force, or one of the weakest forces you can imagine, and they blame the weakest force for all of the stuff happening in the universe. And they ignore all the stronger forces. Ultimately, they ignore electromagnetism, a force that is 10 to the 38 times more powerful than gravity. 10 to the 38 times more powerful than gravity. And they ignore it. Oh, it has nothing to do with anything. There's no way a power like that affects anything. Everything is gravitational. It's insane. These astronomers are scientifically insane. They're crazy. So when our ancestors make a claim that our solar system was completely different just a few thousand years ago, hell, just 1,000 years ago, we can actually take that claim serious, because as I have just built up, hopefully to this point, we have no evidence of a 4+ billion year old solar system. It does not exist. There is no scientific evidence to make that claim. And there are going to be people who don't want to hear that, and I get that. I understand that. Paradigm shifts are not easy, but it's funny. This is a paradigm that never should have existed, never should have even been contemplated, especially for people who tend, or at least claim, to say that they only base their results on science. They have no science. None. Zero. Zilch. So if the scientific evidence does not corroborate the modern day interpretation of orbital mechanics, is it then possible that all of the crazy stuff that our ancestors talk about happening in the past actually did happen? Is it possible that we used to orbit Saturn 6, 10, 12, 15,000 years ago? Is that possible now? Is it possible that Earth's orbit has shifted tremendously from 10 to 12,000 years ago up until now? Is it possible that Mars and Venus and Mercury have had close encounters with Earth? Close enough to affect the planet permanently. Is this a possibility? And we have to say yes. We have no choice if we are going to operate on pure science. Right now, we have no reason to not say that couldn't happen. There's no reason. If our ancestors make a claim, why not just believe them? Why not? We know they're not stupid. We have so many things that prove they're not stupid. Why are we not paying attention to this? See, we can pay attention to this. There's no reason not to. When one of the histories makes a claim, take it seriously. If we take it seriously, suddenly things start to make a lot more sense, by the way. So the problem of orbital mechanics is important if you are a historian. There's no way around this, because orbital mechanics play a huge role in everybody's ancient histories. Now, another thing that a mainstream astronomer might try to point to prove that the planet is 4 point whatever billion years old and all of that garbage is they will say something like, well, we all know that geology takes, billions of years to form, right? The accretion disk model takes billions of years for all of that dust and debris to come together and eventually form a planet. So the only way that Earth could have ever formed is if we were here for billions of years, just, gently rotating around the sun. That theory is also ridiculous. The accretion disk model has 0 successful predictions to its name. 0. It has nothing. The accretion disk model is trash. It even has problems when you get into Newtonian mechanics. There are even issues with it in there. So the billions of years old situation crumbles really quickly once you put it to any kind of scientific scrutiny. And that's just a fact of life, right? This is the reality that we are facing. And the accretion disk model, by the way, is garbage, not just because it's completely failed all rigorous scientific, we can't test it, I'll give them that, but we have not found anything that supports the claim. But the other part about that model, which makes it dumb anyway, is the fact that it factors in nothing relative to plasma physics. They completely ignore all of the other sciences. They completely ignore the electric force. It's there. Even they admit it's there. They admit it is there, and then they have no problem saying that it does nothing. That's the best part. I love that part. Oh yeah, there's electricity in space, but it doesn't do anything. What? Okay, this is where you want to start just slapping people, right? That's where you just slowly walk up to the astronomer, grab him by the neck, just start choking and just... And you watch the light fade from their eyes as as if it's a black hole or something, so they could die just in one of their fictitious little... Anyway, you get my point. So when we read history and we find our ancestors making claims about a completely different astronomy, we have to listen. Right? We have to listen from a scientific perspective, not just a historical perspective. The science is there as well. So everything that I have said up until this point states very clearly that we have no reason to believe that there has been a perfect solar system for 4 billion years. There's no reason to believe that. Now, once we realize that that is the reality of our situation, once we realize that mainstream astronomers have no idea what the hell they're talking about, that frees us to start to do real history and real science. Now, when we have our ancestors talking about gods fighting in the sky, we can now believe them. And don't forget, the reason why we can believe them is because the gods are all associated with planets. And it gets even crazier because the further back you go, our ancestors were not worshiping these planets as if they were some kind of a metaphysical god. They literally just called them planets. The god situation is a modern interpretation. The reason why that exists at all is because modern people, modern historians, modern translators are so indoctrinated with the mainstream version of astronomy that they cannot believe that what they are reading is actually a real history. So they use the term God instead of a planet. So when you're reading your histories, don't forget that. Just exchange planet for God and suddenly all of history changes. All of history suddenly becomes a scientific possibility. Now, what are the implications for what our ancestors talk about? What does this mean? Well, to be blunt, it means that everything in our solar system was completely different just thousands of years ago. The night sky that we see today is not the same one that they saw just 1,000 years ago. According to science and our ancestors, up until about 1,000 years ago, planetary bodies were still a threat to planet Earth. And in fact, 1,000 years ago, when Earth had a close encounter with Mars, which is recorded by everybody, by the way, we had a situation that would set us up for the world we live on today. That encounter would set up our calendar, our current calendar. That would give us our current 23.5 degree inclination latitudinally. Right? This is where we got our current Earth. If we were to go back 2,000 years ago, you wouldn't recognize Earth. The calendar was different. The rotation of Earth was different. The orbit around the sun was different. And this is all what our ancestors record. Now, it sounds crazy. If you continue to believe the mainstream, then it sounds crazy. Right? If you don't take anything I say into account, it sounds crazy. But everything I just said to lay out the fact that we do not know anything about our solar system's origin, we do not know how long it has been in its current configuration, there is no science to prove any of that. What that means is that it is possible then for our ancestors to have actually been recording what they saw in real life. These stories are not fiction. Many problems in history disappear if we take the stories seriously. For example, all over this planet, for some weird reason, we find cultures with different kinds of calendars. But what is interesting about these different kinds of calendars is it's not just that they are unique to each culture. No, that's not the case. We find periods in history, thousands of years ago, to where people's calendars actually all lined up all around the world, but the year was different. This is just one of many oddities that we find when we look back at history. Now, where do we even get our calendar from? Well, the calendar only exists because of our current orbit around the sun. That's how our calendar is generated, right? Our rotation and our orbit. Without that, we don't have a calendar. It doesn't exist. So why do we find periods in time where people are syncing up very unique calendars all over this planet? Now the answer is obvious. Oh, you mean that all of those stories that our ancestors talk about when they say that the Earth literally changed its orbit is real? It makes sense. Suddenly, all of those calendars, they are not stupid monkey calendars. They are not calendars made by people who did not understand what was actually going on in nature. They knew exactly what was going on in nature. And they calculated it. And then they recorded it. They calculated their current environment. So when we have a period of time to where there is a 270-day calendar, They only did that because they had a 270-day calendar. They did not do that because they were stupid. When we have a 360-day calendar, they did not do that because they thought it sounded good for, like, I don't know, a sphere or whatever, right? They didn't do it for that reason, even though that's kind of still smart. No, they did it because for some weird reason, Earth had a 360-day orbit around the sun, and everybody recorded this. What this means is that modern astronomy is completely off kilter. Modern astronomy is not giving us real answers because modern astronomy is not looking for real answers. We have to pull out of what modern astronomers say. I guess that's kind of the whole point of this talk, because on this channel, if we are ever going to be on the same page, we have got to realize that we do not know, as a society, we do not know as much as it seems we do. We are not informed about all of this stuff on space. Our astronomers do not know. They do not have answers for basically almost anything at this point in time. They are misguided. They are corrupt. They are ignorant, etc., right? They're blind. They're controlled, right? That's the situation. If we are ever going to be able to understand what our ancestors are truly telling us, we have to disengage from modern astronomy. We have to make sure that we are constantly questioning the status quo. If there is a paradigm and it's hanging out for a while, it's on us to question it. We don't get to sit back and do nothing and just hang out. It is our job to question it, because who else is going to do it? It's just like all the stuff our ancestors claim. A lot of the stuff, they say, hey, if Venus really was a comet during a certain point in time, it's our job to question that. It's our job to put that to the test. And that's what people are doing. And the great thing about that is that people are starting to scientifically prove these events actually happened. That's what we need to keep on doing. I don't know why I decided to yell into the mic today, but it's one of the problems that I see all the time in history, is that people are afraid to take that next scientific step when they are presented with the evidence. We are seeing this problem with a lot of the older, famous, alternative mainstream people. I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to start crap. I love everybody. But what we are seeing, for example, with a lot of the mainstream alternative names, is they are still believing in the old school garbage paradigms. They are not moving on. They are not questioning. For example, geology. The geologists at that level, they still believe in the millions and billions of years situation. That's what they believe, even though science has progressed since the time of their discoveries. We have made new discoveries in geology. We now have new ways of creating mountains, for example. We now have better understanding of how plasma influences the Earth's geological formation. And I'll leave it at that. But we have all these new sciences, and they're being proven in the labs, and the alternative mainstream geologists, they don't know this. They completely ignore it. So they keep marching on with their theory that is now 20, 30, 40 years old, and they don't change it. Right? They fell into the exact same trap that mainstream people have fallen into. They get a little bit of fame, they latch on to their thing, they get their little cult following, and then that's it, right? They just stop. The reality is we have moved on from so much of that. So much has changed. We have learned so much. The paradigm has to shift. There's no choice. You see these people trying to... it's crazy nowadays, right? I know, I'm yelling into the mic now. You can turn this off. Don't worry about it. No one watches this anyway, so who cares? But think about, look, you watch the older generation. These guys did amazing work for what they did, and some of them are still going, and they're still doing great work. A lot of them are, actually. Some have fallen off, unfortunately. But there's still a lot doing really good work. But they're not going to be around forever, so it's on us to keep going. I'm just saying. Anyway, but a lot of the times what we will see in that generation is they just don't want to budge when it comes to certain scientific principles. Quote unquote scientific principles. Right now, we have no reason to believe there was ever an ice age. Scientifically speaking, that there's no reason to believe that happened. The Younger Dryas, no science for that anymore either. All of those explanations are just mainstream cope, or alternative mainstream cope in the, in the scope of the Younger Dryas. Now that we are starting to look at history in reality. For example, the Younger Dryas annoys me because I call it the Younger Dryas cope because that's what that theory is. What the Younger Dryas is, and we'll have to talk crap on this later. The Younger Dryas people, they're acknowledging catastrophism, but they are not acknowledging the history and all of the new sciences. They're not doing that, and the reason why is because they're still classically trained at the end of the day. They still believe in the millions and billions of years thing. They still believe in modern geology's take on how everything takes a uniformitarian approach. They'll acknowledge that there was a catastrophe, but they won't go too far with it because they don't know how to deal with it because they don't have any of the new science. I won't go any further on that. We can yell at you guys later on the Younger Dryas thing. Maybe we'll do that next. But this is what we are seeing. So when we look at these catastrophes, right, and it's good that people are acknowledging catastrophes around the world. It is good, thankfully. People are seeing it, but they don't know how to deal with it. I think that's the craziest part about the whole thing. They don't know what to do with it because they're seeing the evidence. It's right there, right? You look at Tanis in Egypt, for example, and I think the alternative mainstream theory is, well, I think there was a solar flare that might have hit this area. Yeah. They say that because they have nothing else, right? They don't know what to do with it. The destruction is tremendous, but they don't know what could cause that. So they fall back on something they generally believe they understand, the concept of a solar flare. Of course, they're operating under the thermonuclear model, so they have no idea what they're talking about. So they're just applying a term that sounds good to them because they have nothing else in their toolkit. They are not acknowledging the possibility that our solar system was in a completely different configuration up until about 1,000 years ago. And this is based on science. I know that sounds crazy. This channel will be dedicated to making sure you guys turn around and see all of this stuff. And of course, as the evidence comes down, I'll change it. Doesn't bother me. I want to learn. I want to change. I can't wait to change. Hell, if any of this stuff can be proven wrong, fantastic. Then we can move on. The problem is that all of the catastrophism stuff that has happened, all of the, the Saturnian configuration breakup, the Venus event, the zero event, etc., these are all being proven scientifically and corroborated by our ancestors' eyewitness testimony and even their scientific notation. And mainstream ignores all of that, and so does alternative mainstream. Right? That's the conundrum. I know, I've lost the trail. Okay, my main point was the orbits of the planets. There's no reason to believe that they have been in their orbits for 4+ billion years old. There's no reason for that. There is no scientific basis for that claim whatsoever. So what that does for you, even if you don't want to believe anything else I've said on this channel or whatever, you can't argue with me on that. There's no scientific evidence. You have nothing. Like I said earlier, astronomers have nothing. They have no scientific answer to give me that proves that answer beyond a shadow of a doubt. Nothing. So if we have nothing for a theory, we should probably not use the theory as a foundation for all kinds of science, should we? If we have zero evidence that the planets have been rotating around the sun in their current orientation, then we should probably not believe that. I mean, maybe it's just me. I don't know. I'm just saying. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just, I'm not smart, but hey, no evidence means you just don't use it. So if we get rid of that, what does that do? Well, that makes it to where all of our ancestors' stories suddenly becomes possible. Now, as a quick side note, I know I'm just going to keep going. Some of you might be wondering, well, how the hell? Okay, fine. You acquiesce. Okay. But, planets coming close to Earth, that's crazy. No, it's not. Why? There's nothing unscientific about any of that. And I think that's the key. There is nothing unscientific about all of the claims made by our ancestors. None of it is unscientific. None of it. And in fact, like I've already said, it's already being proven scientifically in the lab. Even NASA's own experiments and their own expeditions are proving all of this as a possibility as well. They just don't acknowledge it. So when we look at the problem of why our ancestors are constantly talking about the planets doing stuff in the sky, we can actually say on a scientific level that that stuff is possible. Once we start to incorporate real science, all of that becomes a possibility. All right, we'll shut this down. But before we do, one last thing. I realize how extreme a lot of this is going to initially sound. Because it is. Now, it's only extreme because of how we have been programmed in the West. Keep that in mind. Remember, all of the psychological defenses that will pop up when you hear about any of the stuff that I talk about on this channel or any other researcher that talks about this stuff, don't forget, this stuff is based on science. This is not, fictional fantasy garbage. I did not just have a dream last night and was like, oh boy, I can't wait to go onto YouTube and just make a stupid video. No, I didn't do that. And none of these people are either. We're just following the evidence. I don't have a theory. I don't have a theory. I'm not selling anything. I'm just following what we see scientifically and historically. And what we are seeing when you look at the real evidence is nothing like what mainstream history and science currently talks about. Our past is nothing like they say. And if it's nothing like that, then what the hell is it? The ramifications for all of this are extreme, and I get that, sort of. Even I don't appreciate fully what this means. Because it's, if you really think about it, I mean, could you imagine this? Just like one night, go outside, look at the moon. Now imagine the planet Mars, right there next to the moon, but make it slightly bigger. Just make it bigger. Could you imagine seeing the planet Mars sitting right there? That would be insane. And now give it some motion. It's on an orbit. It's passing by. You can watch it move. Just imagine that. Not quickly, but quick enough to where you can watch it with the naked eye. That changes everything. I promise you. If you don't believe in any kind of a supernatural God, that might actually convince people that a God exists. I could see atheists dropping to their knees at that point. Because of how awesome that sight would be, and how insignificant you would feel, and how powerless you would feel if you saw a planet like that. Now make it even worse. Now make it a danger to the planet. Now make it look like Mars might actually contact the Earth. Right? That's a whole other psychological level of insignificance. That's insane. You can do nothing about that. Now, don't forget, I don't believe in God. I'm not creationist or anything like that. I'm not pushing that. But the psychology would be there. I guarantee you, if something like that happened, you would see a lot of atheist converts. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. Because what that would make you feel. Could you imagine that? I mean, the ramifications for that. And of course, if the entire solar system is doing this, then what the hell, where did we even start at then? Where did life come from? And how did all that happen? If we have all this chaos going on, then okay. My main point of the talk was I just wanted to complain about, mainstream science, orbital mechanics, no reason to believe that, the solar system has been in its current situation for 4+ billion years. Get rid of that. Now go back and read all of those ancient stories. Now go back, for example, go look at the Mayan calendar. They have a very specific situation going with Venus, don't they? Now that makes sense. And it makes sense scientifically, and it makes sense historically. That's the power of what we're talking about. If we can pull away from modern paradigms, then we can start to figure out the truth about what has happened on this planet in the past few thousand years. And when we do that, that might open the gate to a completely different kind of existence for everybody. And I have a feeling, not a feeling, I know for a fact, that there are people on this planet who are not interested in you discovering any of that. So it's probably pretty important that we figure this out.